Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd. Perhaps the best loved of all psalms. We find it in many versions that we sing as hymns or choruses. It's often sung at weddings or at funerals. It speaks about life's up and downs, but it talks about how God goes with us in all circumstances of life. It's been the subject maybe of 1,000 different sermons. We look at it in 3 vlogs. We look at it as it relates to David, my shepherd. We look at it as it relates to the nation and to ourselves as God, as our shepherd. And finally, we'll look at how God himself is revealed, the names of God are revealed in this psalm. It's particularly apt, isn't it, that this is a psalm of David. David was himself a shepherd when Samuel comes to the family home to anoint the next king. David, the youngest, is out in the fields with the sheep. If you didn't have sons, your daughters would do the job. And when Jacob goes to meet with Laban, he finds Rachel, the younger of the 2 daughters. She's out caring for the sheep. And this whole psalm is hugely personal, isn't it? The whole psalm is hugely personal. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So many personal pronouns there. We find first of all then in this psalm a personal relationship. The Lord is my shepherd. So David is seen here as a sheep. Now David of course himself is a shepherd, as we've said, but David, as he watches the sheep and he considers their actions and how they can often go astray or how much they depend upon the shepherd, realizes that he too is like a sheep and depends completely on the Lord as his shepherd. And this is the most intimate metaphor, the most intimate picture that we've found so far in all of the Psalms. I wonder when he first became aware of the fact that God was his shepherd. You know, as a Christian, I became Christian rather when I was 12. I knew the truths, I'd been taught those, but it didn't become real for me until I'd gone to camp and made a personal commitment, and then I could say the Lord is my shepherd. In Psalm 78 we read that God chose David his servant and took him from the sheep pens. From tending the sheep he brought him to be the shepherd of his people Jacob, of Israel his inheritance. And David shepherded them with integrity of heart, with skillful hands he led them. God had been looking for a man after his own heart, and he found him in David. Shepherd would look after a number of sheep, maybe 100. 100 would be a normal number for one shepherd. More than that, and you would need a hireling, you would need a second shepherd to help with that. But sheep were, well, there were many sheep in Israel in those days. Job is said to have had 14,000 sheep. And Solomon, as he was dedicating the temple, sacrificed 120,000 sheep. The mind boggles. It's difficult to take those numbers in, isn't it? So personal relationship, the Lord is my shepherd. The song goes on to speak about personal provision. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths, or paths of righteousness, for his name's sake. Now, it's a little bit like one of these closing lament psalms where the psalmist is crying out to God, and then at the end of the psalm, God answers, because the whole pattern is lament in its structure, in the syllable count. So with a lament, you get 3 syllables followed by 2 syllables, 3 stressed syllables followed by 2 stressed syllables. So it goes down, it builds up, and it goes down. It sounds like you're doing something good, but then it comes down to sadness. That's the lament pattern in the Psalms, and that's how this works in the Hebrew. But it's really as though we've joined after we've had the lament, and the Lord is going to do good things for him, like confidence expressed in God. And this section here, so far we've said the Lord is my shepherd. That was an opening thing. That was personal relationship. Now we're talking about personal provision. This section begins with what's known as a topic sentence. So if you're writing in English and you're about to write a paragraph, there are a number of ways to do it, but two specifically, you might write with a topic sentence. So in other words, the opening sentence in the paragraph would actually explain what the rest of the paragraph is about. So it would be the key sentence to the whole thing. Or the key sentence might be hidden at the heart of the paragraph, in the middle of it. Well, here the topic sentence is right at the start. I lack nothing. That's what this little section is about. The rest of the first half of the psalm, verses 1 to 3. And really what he's saying is, I lack nothing. All you need is God. Now, there's been great celebration around my neighbourhood recently as Liverpool were given their first championship for 30 years. The fireworks have gone off and people have had flags and bunting and all sorts of things. And people have had banners outside their houses saying, all you need is Klopp. Almost a reflection of the Beatles song, All You Need Is Love. Well, actually, all you need is God. That's what you really need. And David recognises that and acknowledges it. I lack nothing. And in this section here, the key things to notice, first of all, that the places that are involved, the nouns and the adjectives. So green pastures, pastures, noun, green, the adjective describing them. And they're not always easy to find, green pastures for the sheep to feed from. In springtime, the grass is green. But they may also graze in harvested fields. So once the farmer has harvested the field, and once the poor people have gone round and picked up, gleaned any little bits and pieces that have been left over, the sheep were allowed to go in, and they would enjoy eating some of the harder stalks. In summer, of course, this green grass turns to hay, and again, it's fodder for them. But in winter, the shepherd may have to provide the food himself. Often he'll go out and he'll cut down branches from trees, and he'll strip those branches and feed them with the good things he can find on the trees. Or he may have to take them into his own house and feed them some kind of a mash. Sheep are not very good at finding their own grazing, their own pasture. Goats are much, much better than sheep are. Often the goats and the sheep would be together, which makes sense of those Bible parables of sheep and goats and separating them, etc., etc. So not only green pastures, but quiet or still waters suggest a gentle stream. Now this is an interesting fact. Sheep apparently cannot drink from running water. The water gets up their nose. I mean, that kind of thing's happened to us. If you've had a fizzy drink, goes up your nose, it disorients you. But sheep apparently, if the water gets up their nose, it disorients them, and they'd be likely to fall into the stream and then borne away by it. So the shepherd would look for an area where he could cut a runnel, where he could cut out some turf, and the water would come in and it would stop flowing, and the sheep would be able to graze from that. We get this idyllic, don't we, this bucolic scene. But around the shepherd could well be barren wastes. The desert is never far away in Israel. The shepherd would sometimes have to take the sheep across the streams. The shepherd himself would ford the stream, and the boldest sheep would follow him. They would jump into the water and go across following him. But some sheep would be timid. They'd go in, they wouldn't get much of a footing, and sometimes they'd be borne away by the stream itself, and then the shepherd would have to go back into the stream and collect the sheep and carry the actual sheep. Some sheep will need rescuing. Isaiah 43 tells us that when you pass through the waters, I will be with you. When you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. A lovely promise from the Lord. And it talks about leading in right paths. So there have been green pastures, quiet or still waters, now right paths. There are wrong paths. I've said before, haven't I, that there is a way that seems right to man, but the end thereof is death. That's Proverbs 16:25. Proverbs 11:6 says, the righteousness of the blameless makes their path straight, but the wicked are brought down by their own wickedness. So we can set off on wrong paths. They're the places involved in those opening verses. Here's the verbs, the doing words, and what's happening here. The shepherd makes me lie down. There's a firmness here. Lie down. When you train your dog, sit, come. The shepherd trains the sheep. And David experiences this, that God is his shepherd and God is training him, disciplining him. The shepherd does know better than the sheep. He leads me beside. The shepherd leads. Eastern shepherds lead. They don't drive. If you see a shepherd, or you see someone in the Eastern pictures driving sheep, they're more likely to be a butcher, taking them off to market. And he guides me along. There's a sense of protracted care. Along, he guides me. He doesn't just look after me for a little while. He looks after me along the way. But we are prone to stray, aren't we? All we like sheep have gone astray, Isaiah 53. And if the sheep stray into another farmer's fields, the shepherd is responsible for making good the damage. And sometimes they go along narrow paths, so the shepherd has to have them under control. All pictures of our relationship with the Lord. The Lord sometimes disciplines us. New Testament talks about how he disciplines those whom he loves, those are sons. Okay. The topic sentence here has been, I lack nothing. The provision we find in all of this, because we've been talking, haven't we, about personal provision. In the morning, the meadows are wet with dew. At noon, the heat of the day, the sheep need to find somewhere to hide behind a rock so they're not in the full glare of the sun. The shepherd will do that for them. Goats will keep on feeding at noon, but the sheep can't do that. They get sunburn, so they need to be kept from that. And in the evening, they're brought to the shelter of the fold. That's like a picture of this psalm, really. It's almost like you're walking through the day with the shepherd. He refreshes my soul. There's another verb, isn't it? He refreshes my soul. Like water refreshes the body and replenishes it, he refreshes the shepherd. God refreshes David. He restores him. He revives him. The word actually is translated converts in Psalm 19. The soul, my soul, the deep part of me. That's what David's really saying, that God refreshes his life. And that's how he knows that he lacks nothing. What else could he want if the Lord is his shepherd? And he does all this for his name's sake, because the shepherd's reputation is on the line. So we've had personal relationship and personal provision. Now we've got personal protection. Come to the second half of the psalm. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, or the valley of the shadow of death. Notice that the sheep is walking, not running. There's no headlong running away from something. Fear is mastered because the shepherd is with him. The valley of the shadow of death, Salmawet, in Job 38, have the gates of death been shown to you? Have you seen the gates of the deepest darkness? Only the Lord, says Derek Kidner, can lead a man through death. All other guides turn back, and the traveller must go on alone. But the Lord goes with us into the valley of the shadow of death and beyond. The valley of the shadow of death, or the valley of the deepest, darkest valley, would be like a narrow defile, so a very narrow path with steep sides either side, ideal for robbers and thieves and wild animals to haunt. The shepherd may have deliberately made the sheep rest up earlier so that they can keep going. They're not going to stop. So sometimes we seem to be going nowhere, but God is preparing us for a very difficult situation in life. And the shepherd would have a lantern made of parchment that he could light, a bit like a Chinese lantern that would pull up, and it would have an oil lamp inside. And this mountainous area in Judea, well known. The westward descent from the hard limestone country of the Judean mountains towards the coastal plain is by way of a longitudinal trough of foss cut through chalk, followed by the low, rolling, soft limestone hills of the Shephelah, while eastwards the landscape falls steeply towards the Jordan Rift Valley. The southern end of the mountain range is Beersheba, in the northern part of the Negev, where the mountains slope down into the Beersheba Valley. The average height of the Judean mountains is 900 meters, nearly 3,000 feet. But David says, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Because it's personal, he now addresses God as you. I will fear no evil. Perfect love casts out fear. There is no fear in love, says John the Apostle, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. 1 John 4:18. Talk very briefly about some of the shepherd's accoutrements, his equipment. The rod is like a cudgel. It's an offensive weapon against enemies, also to break down thorn bushes, and it's often looped at the waist. He has a staff, which is a crook, not always with the curved bit at the top, but often for protection. It's laid across the sheep when he's counting them into the fold at night, or might rescue them, pull them up with that, bringing down high branches for the sheep to eat from, tasty treats for the sheep. It became the symbol of kingship. It became the scepter that the king held in his hand. He has a sling used offensively against wild animals to frighten them off, bears, lions, wolves, etc. But protectively, he'd throw a stone beyond a straying sheep so that the sheep would be frightened and turn back and come back towards him rather than have a sheepdog. He had a goatskin scrip, his little bag in which he carried his food, fruit, nuts, cheese, etc. But often he'd eat on the go, berries and the like. He wore a sheepskin coat. And it was reversible. In the daytime, the woolly bit would be on the outside, but at night time he'd reverse it, so the woolly bit was on the inside, and that would keep him warm at night. The sheep would identify with him, as we do with the Lord Jesus, who is the good shepherd. And he had a reed flute to while away the hours. You are with me, it says, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. In Isaiah 40, we read, comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim to her that her hard service has been completed, that her sin has been paid for, that she has received from the Lord's hand double or the right amount for her sins. And there's a picture of a bishop comforting the troops on the Bayeux Tapestry. Comfort means confort with strength in the French. And a bishop's seen laying about a group of reluctant soldiers with the flat of his sword, and the caption says, Bishop Odo comforts the troops. So God's comfort sometimes can be harsh, but he has to be cruel to be kind. Finally, we look at the personal preparation. Verses 1 to 4 about the day's journey. Verses 5 to 6 at day's end. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. So the shepherd becomes the host. My enemies, we've already said wild animals, but there could be snakes. You could go into a field and there would be snakes there. They come out of little holes, nip on the feet of the legs of the sheep, and the sheep would die poisoned. So the shepherd would prepare a table. So he'd go in. He's got a little bottle of hog's oil, and he would put the little oil round the little holes where he knows the snakes are. And if the snakes tried to come up, they slide, and then they slide back down again because they can't go over the oil. And the sheep won't go anywhere near those holes because they hate the smell of the oil. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. Anointing of the head with oil was done to sheep and to camels because they were subject to sunstroke. And it's a feast. The shepherd always gives the sheep the best, like God always wants to give us the best. My cup overflows. The shepherd with a large two-handled cup of water. Finally, we find the personal presence of the shepherd with us. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. At the end of the day, the shepherd takes the sheep into a sheepfold in open country, or a cave in stormy weather, or home to the village. He'd count them in. He would bind up their injuries. He'd protect them with his own life because he would be the gate to the sheepfold. He would lie in the entrance and keep watch over them at night. And it says forever, all my days. It's a lifelong experience. But we take it to mean that the shepherd, who is God, will not only look after us in this life, but beyond, forever and ever. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. What a wonderful psalm. No wonder David could say, the Lord is my shepherd. May the Lord bless you and keep you, and make his face shine upon you and give you peace.